Canadian officials have said over and over.
Canada is retaliating against the U.S.
Canada, we'll see what happens with Canada, but the people of Canada would be paying.
In the case of Canada, we're spending $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada.
But if they became our 51st state, it'd be the greatest thing they could ever do.
Did the U.S. just say it's subsidizing Canada?
You're subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year.
The United States is subsidizing Canada.
As I called him Governor Trudeau, I said, listen, what would happen if we didn't subsidize you? Because we give them a lot of money. It's very unfair.
As in writing us a $100 billion check every year? Trump says it, and a lot of people are actually believing it. But is there any truth to it? Let's look at it in some more detail. I've been noticing this comment pop up a lot recently. Donald Trump has been repeating over and over again this line, that the US is subsidizing Canada and that Canada is taking hundreds of billions of dollars a year from the US, and that America is essentially getting ripped off.
Why are we supporting a country 200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state.
Now, that's a really big claim to make of your neighbor and ally. The thing is, he's not talking about foreign aid or actual government-to-government payments. What he's referring to, I am pretty confidently assuming anyway, is the US trade deficit with Canada.
Donald Trump has always been obsessed with trade balances, trade surpluses and deficits, and the fact that the US has a trade deficit.
We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. We lose in trade deficits.
In 2023, the US imported around 427 billion US dollars worth of Canadian goods, and it exported about 355 billion of goods to Canada. So yes, if you look at that math, there's a difference there. Approximately $72 billion difference. If you round that up and you squint a little, you will come up with Trump's 100 billion number.
He talks about, I'm a trader, I love trade, I want so much trade, but it has to be fair. But what he means by fair is that if the US has a surplus, it's fair. If the US has a deficit, it's unfair.
But here's the thing, a trade deficit is not a subsidy. It's not the US giving Canada money. It's just a record of how much more they bought from us than we bought from them. It's the same thing if, for example, I buy $1,000 worth of stuff from you and you only buy $700 worth of stuff from me. That doesn't mean I gave you a $300 gift. It just means I liked your stuff more, so I paid more for it. Well, that's what this trade deficit really is in simple terms. And even that $72 billion number doesn't really tell you the full story. And that is because the US doesn't just sell goods to Canada. It sells services too. Think financial services, software, tech, media, licensing, even Hollywood and streaming.
It's very important to look at services as well, because services has been a growing part of trade for many decades now.
When you include services, the trade deficit with Canada drops to about $40 billion. It's still a deficit, but again, it's not a subsidy, and drastically different number than the $100 billion figure that's loosely being thrown around.
So I think what he's saying implicitly, we're giving more dollars to Canada than they're spending in the US. And he thinks that's a subsidy.
He's just saying the very fact that there's a trade deficit shows that we must be subsidizing things in some fashion, and that's not the case.
So what exactly is the US buying from Canada, you might ask, right? A lot of it is energy. Canada is the #1 exporter of crude oil to the US. We also export natural gas and electricity. But here's the real kicker. American refineries are actually designed to process Canadian heavy crude. This crude oil, coming primarily out of Alberta's oil sands, has a very high viscosity and sulfur content.
Because of the distance, because of pre-existing supply chain links, because of transportation routes, this is why Canada and the US trade the most.
So it's not about charity, it's about infrastructure, supply chains, and economics. In other words, the US buys from Canada because it makes sense.
If you remove oil, we're now running a trade deficit with the United States.
It's largely one commodity in our case. And that commodity is not putting Americans out of work. It's putting Americans to work.
So why call it a subsidy? Why frame a trade relationship where the US gets oil, lumber, and other essentials as if Canada's mooching off of them? It is a misunderstanding or something else entirely. Trump has always taken a very transactional view of trade. His idea is if the US buys more than it sells, it is getting ripped off. The framing works politically. It sounds simple, but in reality, it is so much more complex than that. The US also runs huge trade deficits with countries like Germany, Japan, and of course China.
And it only accounts for about 5% of the overall US deficit just in terms of traded goods. It's not even in the top 5 countries that have a larger surplus.
So those deficits don't mean the US is being robbed. They mean that American consumers buy a lot of stuff, and the global economy is very interconnected. Tariffs, subsidies, and trade balances are tools, but they're not inherently good or bad. It all depends on how they're used. Calling it a subsidy, though, that's just not accurate. It plays into a narrative of America being taken advantage of, when in reality, the US economy benefits massively from trade with Canada. Here's where it matters. When that kind of rhetoric spreads, people start supporting tariffs and trade barriers, thinking it'll fix the issue. But those policies can really backfire. They raise prices, disrupt supply chains, they hurt consumers, and damage relationships with allies. If you don't believe me, look at history and what has happened to countries and economies each time tariffs have been implemented.
We're doing it because of habit, and we're doing it because we like our neighbors, and we've been good neighbors. But we can't do it forever. You know, they make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit.
In short, all I can say is nothing good. So no, Canada is not being subsidized by the US. So the next time you hear that, you'll know exactly why that doesn't actually make sense. Well, I hope you found this breakdown very helpful. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. I post fact-based commentary. Thank you so much for watching.